As Stephen mentioned, we have worked together before on various projects, but my work is primarily based around the prevention of workplace bullying and harassment. So I work through conduct change as a trainer and a consultant, but I also am the chief campaigner for Stop Hurt at Work, which is looking to get workplace bullying recognised in UK law. So very different sides of the same coin. I'm going to just jump straight in because we've got such a limited amount of time today, and I want to just really give you a brief introduction to sexual harassment in the workplace, which is today's topic, and in particular looking at the change to the law and what you really should already have been doing as a result of that. But let's have a look at the scale of the problem first of all. Sexual harassment, 52% of women in the UK have experienced sexual harassment at work. That was a 2016 figure, and things haven't really got better. The Government Equalities Office did a huge national survey in 2020. 85% of those sexually harassed at work did not formally report it. That's really important, and recent surveys as well from the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development shows that there's still this real big gap between the employer feeling really confident that they're addressing this, and the employee reality of what happens when they do experience sexual harassment at work. So 29% of employees during a 12-month period experience sexual harassment. Now, obviously on that slide, I've written that it's 52% of women in the UK, but what we really have to understand is that it can happen to men as well. And men actually are likely to be harassed by both men and women. But what's really different is the types of behaviours. So for women, they tend to be more likely to be towards a more severe end, and in fact moving towards what would actually be classed as sexual assault and even to rape. So we've had, case studies in the media about those. So it's a really, really important topic. So last year, the law changed in relation to sexual harassment, but let's have a look. It is actually nearly 12 months ago. So actually just a quick question for you, if you can just pop into chat. It was October 2024 when the legislation changed and came into force. So just as I'm talking, just pop into chat. In the last 12 months, how many of you have done training on sexual harassment in your workplace? In the meantime, I'll just give you a little bit of background about where it started from. So the legislation, it was always there. Sexual harassment was always unlawful. The Equality Act 2010 made that really clear. 3 types of harassment were unlawful. Harassment related to a relevant protected characteristic, and I've put a list of those at the bottom of the screen there. Sexual harassment was always identified separately, but also less favourable treatment of a worker because they submit to or reject sexual harassment. So essentially, if somebody is being pressured to enter into a sexual relationship or sexual acts with somebody in return for perhaps a promotion, then that's obviously a clear case of sexual harassment. And we've seen some, really high profile cases of sexual harassment in the workplace. We've also had just last week, the bar did a huge review which covered working at a barrister's chambers, the self-employed barristers and the judiciary, and actually really highlighted how a power imbalance can come into play in these kind of scenarios as well. But that was always unlawful. All of those acts were unlawful. And sexual harassment has always had its own definition written into the Equality Act. So it's unwanted conduct of a sexual nature. And it has the purpose or effect of violating an individual's dignity. And those two words, purpose or effect, are really, really important. So it's not about the intention, but it's about the way that that was received, the impact that it had on the individual, how they felt. If they felt humiliated, degraded, if it created an offensive environment, then that is sexual harassment. And it's really, really important that we understand that you can't get away with it by just saying, I didn't mean that, it was just banter, that good old word, that catch-all. So how did the law change? So the Equality Act already said it was unlawful for an employer to harass a worker or anyone who's applied to them for employment. So it starts really, really early on in that process. But it's now also unlawful if an employer fails to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment of workers. And that's not just within the organisation, but a really key part is the fact that it includes sexual harassment by third parties as well. So it's this turning around so that there's actually a prevention element, and also the third parties was one of the big changes. And what does that really mean in practice? Well, actually, employers now have a positive legal duty to prevent it. They need to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassments in the course of their employment. And this is what's known as the preventative duty. So it's no good just waiting for it to happen and then dealing with the fallout of that. You've actually got to have a look at where are the risks. You need to anticipate where sexual harassment might happen in your workforce, and that includes anticipating when third parties might be involved. But what are reasonable steps? Well, what's really interesting is that the Equality and Human Rights Commission, who issued the technical guidance on all of this work, have put together an employer 8-step guide. And these are the 8 steps that they suggest. So for a lot of organisations now, it's not just about having an all-encompassing anti-bullying and harassment policy. A lot of them are now actually looking to create a separate sexual harassment policy. Engaging your staff. You've got to get your staff involved. If people aren't actually having the conversations, if they don't understand what it is that we're talking about, then we're not going to be able to stop it. They're also more likely to help you find where the risks are in the workplace. If you haven't got employee voice in there, then you're not doing your risk assessments properly. And it's actually, that's a really, really big part, this assessing and taking steps to reduce the risk in your workplace is part of the new legislation, and a really important element. And that's going to get picked up. So when organisations go to employment tribunals, they'll be looking for whether or not those steps have been taken. We need to make sure that there's really clear reporting as well. So anonymous reporting is quite an important element in here because of the nature of the allegations that people might be reporting. They might find it very, very difficult to speak up. And you're asking people to speak up at their most vulnerable. But training is so, so important. And the tick box exercise training that might have been used previously isn't going to really fit the bill anymore. You've really got to make sure that every single person in your organisation has training so they understand what kind of behaviours actually constitute sexual harassment, and also what they can do to help prevent that. They need to know about what to do when a harassment complaint is made. And this is not just about letting people know about the reporting procedures, but if you have got people who are dealing with complaints of harassment, then the chances are they're going to need much more specialist training. Trauma-informed approach is so, so important in these kind of situations. If somebody comes to you and says that they have been assaulted, sexually assaulted at work, you have to have the skills to be able to deal with that in the moment, and know also where to refer it on to and when not to refer it on to. So that's really, really important. The other area that's quite new is dealing with harassment by third parties. So this can be anybody that you're coming into contact in the workplace. So it could be contractors coming onto the site. It can be a trainer coming to do training. It's contact at social events, it's networking events, it's conferences, it's all different areas like this. And, you know, some of those could have alcohol involved. So again, we've really got to look at the risks that are involved in those different situations. And it's no good just doing a risk assessment and putting it on the shelf. You need to be monitoring, you need to be evaluating, you need to be taking corrective action all the way through. What's really interesting is, you know, this is quite new, and really until cases start going through the employment tribunal, then we're not really going to see kind of what reasonable steps might be for a different size of employer. But it has to be appropriate for the size of organisation. But a really interesting case that's just come to the fore recently. Lidl. So Lidl have, they had a case where they didn't prevent sexual harassment of a young worker. And so the Equalities and Human Rights Commission have actually stepped in. And what they actually said, if you read this, this is a list of actions that they now think that Lidl have to take to meet the standards of meeting that anticipatory duty, that positive legal duty. Run a staff survey and assess if additional preventative steps are necessary. Monitor and analyse informal complaints to identify ongoing risks. So it's not just about your formal complaints, and not many organisations actually really take a good look at informal complaints, and yet there should be a lot more action going on in terms of what you can do, because sometimes a complaint is, you know, it's borderline, it's in that grey area, and there's a lot of conversations that you can have, a lot of different approaches you can take before going straight onto a grievance in this kind of situation. But a lot of organisations don't actually put a lot of time and effort into that. So that's where it's going to be something quite different. But preventative steps. Monitor the effectiveness of complaint handling for formal complaints. Assess trends and risks. Engage your DE&I groups, engage your employees, and talk to them about any additional preventative steps which could be taken. Monitor and review your risk assessments, review your policies and training content, including relationships at work guidance. So all of those, you can see the real emphasis there is on preventative work there, and also on the risk management and the risk assessment. So that's quite, you know, it might look like a lot of work. Lidl is a huge organisation. You know, we recognise that, which is why they have a big list there. If it was a smaller organisation, then, you know, the steps they're being asked to take has to be proportionate, but it has to involve those preventative steps and assessing the risks. There was another case that went through employment recently, employment tribunal recently, and this is talking about in the course of employment. And one of the questions around, can your business be liable for sexual harassment that takes place on the way to work? So in this situation, there was a worker who was due to be at a venue, but she missed the prearranged transport. So she accepted a lift from a colleague. But he actually, instead of taking her to work, he took her to a different venue and he sexually harassed her until she managed to escape and call the police. Now, at the original tribunal, then they agreed that harassment took place, but didn't agree that the employer was liable. It went to appeal. And what they really assessed there was whether the lift and the harassment during it was an extension of work. So it found that the harasser had actually sent sexual messages while on shift hours earlier. So anything online as well is absolutely relevant to this legislation. The only reason she was in his car was work related, and workplace lifts had happened before. So even though he did not take her to the venue where she was supposed to be working, the actual process of having a lift from this person was taken to be in the course of employment. And it's only as we get these cases coming through that we're going to learn more about this. But again, it's looking at, was there a risk there? So yes, so potentially there are risks of people having personal messaging systems, personal contact details as opposed to work contact details and sending messages on there. You know, getting into the car was a work related situation because it wasn't going to the normal place of work, it was going to a different venue. So it's, you know, quite commonplace for that to happen, to have workplace lists. So we really have to think about where all the risks are. Now, I'm very conscious of time, so it's been an absolute whistle-stop tour. If you want to find out more, then we can dig deep into this with you and your organisation, really looking at the definitions, the different forms and behaviours that sexual harassment can take, and the impact of being harassed in the workplace. You know, it's not just the individual impact. Sexual harassment in the workplace is bad for productivity. So we really need to make our workplaces safer. How to intervene safely, being an active upstander. I don't use the word bystander. I think an active bystander makes it sound like you're just standing by. You know what's going on, but you're actively choosing not to do anything. Identifying those areas of risk, exploring those prevention approaches, and what to do actually in the different situations right up to those more serious sexual assaults. So if you want to find out more about that, then please do contact us, and you can either come directly to myself or to Stephen and the team at Inspiring Cultures Limited. There's a link there, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, the technical guidance is worth having a look at. If you are dealing with this in your organisation at all, then that's absolutely a must read for you. Stephen, that was an absolute whistle-stop tour. Are there any questions in the chat?
No, so I'll open it back up to people. So first of all, thank you, Nicki, because I think a couple of things I clearly picked out from that is about the prevention part. So we got a round of applause there as well, Nicki. So there's a round of applause for you there as well. Come up. So about actually that prevention part, really, really important. And about we've all got a role to play within this. It's not just about the organisation. It's about us being, and I like the phrase there, upstander. So an active upstander. So from that perspective. So I'll just open it up now. Any questions have we got on the chat function? And I'll quite happily to ask Nicki from that point of view. But any questions have we got there from the chat function to ask Nicki from that perspective? And we do appreciate giving up your time today, but you can see there's nuances within the law change, but actually it has a big impact about how organisations really look after their colleagues and also look after themselves from that point of view. So any questions have we got from there? So I'll just hang on for a minute or two and I'll kind of bring us to a close.
Sorry, Steve, yes. I was just going to pick up one more point, really, and on that prevention element and the risk assessment. We have to remember that actually employee voice, or worker voice, I should say, is really, really important because it's not only, you know, we have our blind spots about where the risks might be, and yet the most vulnerable people are likely to be your younger people. Yes. People with disabilities are really at risk in this area as well. So make sure you have got different voices. Don't give it to, you know, your health and safety manager or your HR manager and just say, you need to deal with this. Everybody needs to be involved.
Yeah, perfect. So we've got some lovely messages there. So thank you, Julian. So I'll start with Emma saying, Emma, thank you, really appreciate it. So Holly, no questions, grateful for the information. Julian as well. So with Holly, really useful information. So I'll bring it to a close today. So I just want to say a huge thank you for giving up your time listening to us talk about actually something that's really, really important about protecting your colleagues and also as an employer. From our point of view, please reach out. We're there to answer questions and support you kind of on your journey, and make sure that, you know, as Nicki said there, that the workplace is a safe place to work and also profitable. That's the kind of key to it at the end of the day, to really make sure that organisations thrive. So I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody today before I stop the recording. We look forward to hearing from you again, and also thank you to Nicki as well for her time. But enjoy the rest of your day. So I really, really appreciate it. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.